Morning, folks. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, back out here at the Pathfinder Classroom and the Pathfinder Outfitters Kitchen. What I thought we'd do today, these oil lamps are getting more and more popular and making it kind of a resurgence in the bushcraft community. If you look on Instagram, places like that, you see these oil-type lanterns, especially these smaller ones, all the time in people's camps. And I've been using this type lantern for a long, long time, back in the days of the Trapper series and even before that on YouTube videos. I used a lantern like this every once in a while. They're just a good, convenient light source that is easy to carry fuel for because it's self-contained for a very long period of time. A tank of fuel in these things will burn for 8 to 10 hours easy. So if you want to burn one of these in camp at night, it gives you a nice light that you don't have to worry about running out of batteries, things like that. And it gives you a nice retro ambience to your camp as well. So I understand why they're so popular. What I'd like to do today is kind of talk you through the different types of lanterns that were kind of made through history and how they work and the fuels that they use, because you do have options when it comes to fuels with these lanterns as well. And this is a Frühhand lantern. This is made in Germany. This is probably one of the better, more high quality modern oil lanterns that's made today. And you can buy these from Lehman's Hardware in the US. That's their importer for Frühhand and Petromax in the US is Lehman's Hardware. And they're about $50, $60, depending on the color and model that you buy. Now, this is what's called a cold blast lantern. You had 3 different types of lanterns. You had what was called a dead flame, a hot blast, and a cold blast lantern. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the first thing I want you to understand what these type lanterns is the type fuel that they burn. Okay, so let's speak to fuels on these lanterns first, all right? The fuel that's used in these lanterns, you can choose between lots of different fuel types, and different fuel types are going to give you different results. Most people in these lanterns nowadays burn a paraffin wax fuel. The problem with that is, in the wintertime, it's going to become a block of wax with fuel mixed into it, and it's going to be inoperable. And it will do the same thing in the tank of this lantern. It will freeze up like this in cold weather. What I use generally is straight kerosene, okay? Straight kerosene works fine. You can buy it at the gas station, fill up a can, and just use out of it as you need it, and it's fairly inexpensive. Much more inexpensive than lamp oil that's got paraffin mixed into it. Now, it might surprise you to know that fuel for these lanterns, especially in rural areas back in the day, well into the 20th century, were things like raccoon and possum lard, okay? And remember the difference between lard and tallow is. Tallow is usually solidified at room temperature. Now, it's very cold out here right now. So even though this is lard, it is a solid because it's so cold outside. If it were in the 70s, this would be fairly liquid. And it can be used as a fuel inside this lantern. Although it does go rancid, I'm sure it has a foul smell to it after it goes rancid. However, raccoon and possum lard were a very common fuel, especially again in rural areas. So when you're talking about resources off the landscape, this is rendered raccoon lard from the modern trapping class, from the fat from raccoon that we skin. This is one raccoon, might be 2, but I think it's 1 raccoon worth of fat here rendered into lard. And that's enough to fill this tank probably 1.5 times at least. So you do have natural fuels that you can use. Now, you can also burn just about any type of cooking oil in this lantern, although it's not going to burn as well or as clean as things like kerosene. So you could burn olive oil. You want the least amount of viscosity possible. So you want the thinnest oils that you can get for this so that it travels up the wick well. Heavy viscosity in oil is not going to allow it to wick very well. So you want really thin oils, but things like mineral oils, things like cooking oils like olive oil will all work in here. Canola oil, those things will work as well. So you can multi-purpose things if you want to have cooking oils and lamp oils at the same time. However, those type fuels are not going to burn near as clean as kerosene or as well as kerosene. So you have to kind of make that choice as you go. For me, I just use kerosene in all my lanterns, but I understand that other fuels can be used in an emergency like this raccoon lard if it were not solidified. And that's the biggest problem with a lot of those oils and things, is that when they freeze, they solidify or gel, and they will not work well in these lanterns at that point. We'll never have that problem with kerosene. Okay, so before we look at some other lanterns and talk about the different types of lanterns, let's just kind of look at the anatomy of this lantern, because it's probably the most common one that you're going to see people use, and probably the most common one that you're going to buy. So what you have is you have what's called the font, and that's the bottom of this lantern. That is the tank for the fuel. And you have a fuel cap on there. Now, the lifting lever lifts the lantern up so that you can light the wick. You have an adjustment here that will lift the wick up and down to adjust the height of your flame, or to be able to bring it up a little bit so that you can light it. And generally you want to turn it down a little bit after the fact. Once you drop that lever back down over the top, you then adjust your flame to where you want it. And you can remove the globe for cleaning purposes if you want to by lifting up the hood, tilting the globe backwards, and pulling it out of the metal frame. You can also remove the burner itself from the font by turning sideways and lifting up so that you can replace the wick. And to put it back in place, just slide it down on there and turn it sideways into those ears. Put your globe back into the globe housing just like this. Tilt it forward, lift up on the springed hood, tilt it up and drop it down. Now, very simple operation with these lanterns. Very easy to maintain, very easy to operate. One thing you want to be careful of is dropping these lanterns, okay? One thing that a lot of people don't understand is the frame of this lantern is not just a decoration. It is a working portion of this lantern that transfers air. And so if you drop it and it gets loose, you can't have air escaping from the areas that it's connected to the tank or the font. The same thing up here, you can have air escaping. What happens with this lantern, this is called a cold blast lantern. And a cold blast lantern means that when the air goes up through the lantern, it escapes through the top vent, but it also sucks air in here and drafts it through the tube and transfers down and pushes up again so that you get clean, absolutely clean air going up through this lantern, which makes it burn brighter than what's called a hot blast lantern, which we'll talk about in a minute. And that's why you see these most commonly today. Now, let's talk about other types of lanterns. Now, this is an old barn lantern. This is what's called a hot blast lantern. For the most part, it works the same way. This is called a high-low. And you actually lift the whole hood up on this thing to expose the burner. You can raise and lower the wick and light it the same way. You can also release it the same way and tilt it forward or back to remove and clean your glass. Okay? The difference with this lantern is this is called a hot blast lantern. As you can see here, there's no vent area to get complete fresh air into this lantern. So what happens is when the air's drafting upwards, the burnt air is drafting upwards and you've got a flame in there, hot air is going up into this tube, circulating around and back down into the bottom here, which is perforated with holes so that you get air flowing back up to the flame again. So you're going to get some fresh air in here, but you're going to get mostly hot air in here. And that's called a hot blast lantern. It's not going to burn as bright or as clean as a cold blast lantern. However, this was an improvement that was made to lanterns, again, from the very beginning to make them burn a little bit brighter, a little bit cleaner, a little bit more efficient. So this was the predecessor basically to the cold blast lantern, and it's called a hot blast lantern. It doesn't have the hood, it doesn't have the vents on it to draw fresh air in and push it down these tubes. What you're getting here is mostly hot air going through these tubes and back up. The only fresh air you're getting is what's sucked up through the bottom here from updraft, and it mixes with hot air, okay? Okay, this lantern is called a dead flame lantern. And it also burns kerosene just like the hot blast and cold blast lanterns, but it will also burn other fuels like the other lanterns do as well. However, I just use kerosene. The reason this is called a dead flame lantern is there's no forced air from the frame of this lantern. The only air that can get into this lantern basically comes from the sides here, which are blocked by the font to keep it from blowing the flame out. And you also have air that can draw in here and escape here, but you really don't have any kind of a vent system on here that's made to force any air anywhere, because there's no arms on this thing to have air travel down below the burner and push air back up through. So basically what you have here is you have a removable font that comes out of the lantern completely. And it's basically like a can with the burner on top that screws in. You fill this with fuel, and you can see these holes in here are made so that oxygen can travel in, or air can travel in, but it's blocked somewhat by this font, or by this font itself, so that when the air comes up through, it's not blowing directly on the flame and blowing the flame out. And that was the problem with a lot of lanterns early on, was that the flame could be blown out. So this and this vent at the top that dissipates things with these angles in here are what keep direct air from blowing down on top of this lantern and blowing it out. And this is a typical railroad style lantern. It would just clip shut. Got my arm in the way. There we go. So you've got a clip on the front that you push, and that lifts this up. You would then remove the glass and light the wick, and then put the glass back on and snap the lid down. And that's the way these lanterns are made. And again, this is called a dead flame lantern. These are also very popular with collectors because they're railroad style lanterns. This one says C&O Railroad on the frame, or on the vent itself, and it says C&O Railroad is etched on the glass. So these are a more popular, more expensive lantern. If you're going to buy lanterns, these are going to be one of the more expensive ones that you can buy. So that gives you the difference between a dead flame, a hot blast, and a cold blast lantern. Okay, guys, well, listen, lanterns built this country. Before there was electric lights, before there was battery operated lights, these fuel oil lanterns were what paved the way for us to be able to do things at night and be able to build this country to what it is today. So they're very nostalgic. There's a lot of heritage behind these lights, and there are lots and lots of different types of antique lights out there, whether they're cold blast, hot blast, or dead flame, for lots and lots of purposes. Some with shrouds on them for inspection and for reflecting light forward. Some with brackets on the back of them that would reflect light forward that could be attached to a motor carriage or some type of wagon. There's lights that have a magnification area on the front that were used for inspection. Lots of different colored globes, red, green, blue, kind of a purple color, and clear, yellow even. So there's lots and lots of this stuff out there. If you're looking to buy yourself a modern lantern to use for bushcraft camping and things like that, Fruhand, like I said, is probably one of the better ones to go out and spend your money on. They're a very robust lantern. They're very, very well made. They're made in Germany, like I said, and they won't let you down for sure. If you're going to buy an antique lantern or buy one at a yard sale or something like that, you know, look for an older Dietz that says made in the USA on it. It'll usually say made in New York, USA on a Dietz. Make sure that, you know, the font is in good shape. It's not going to leak on the bottom from rusting through. Make sure that the wick adjustment operates. If it doesn't have a wick in it, make sure it's got the teeth on the wheel that lift that wick up and down. Make sure the font itself is in good shape and the burner's in good shape. Make sure it's got good glass in it that's not broken or chipped. Make sure the vent operates properly, and make sure that it's free of any looseness in these arms. Anywhere this thing's loose in the arms, it's going to leak air on you, and it's not going to work as well as it would if it were good and sturdy. So just things I would point out to you to remember if you're going out and buying a used lantern, a place that you can go to buy a new lantern. I appreciate you guys joining for this video today. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, for our business, all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.